Howdys and salutations, y'all! How are you doing? Let's try to not clip the mic quite so much. Oh, I need to fix those sound settings at some point. I noticed a few streams ago, I think I'd been tweaking sound settings, and I've accidentally made myself somewhat muffled. And I don't love that. It's not great. Or maybe it's always sounded like this, and I need to actually listen to my own VOD sometimes. One of the two. In any case, I hope y'all are having a fine evening so far. I know that, for the most part, I am. Keeps on plugging along, so we're going to pick up where we left off. But first I am going to literally write a note to myself. Stream sound settings. It might not be ready by tomorrow's stream, but we'll try to sort it out before the next batch. And we really do streams in batches, don't we? Funky setup. Okay, let's see. Notes to self. Today's notes to self. Stream! Hey look, we're doing that one right now. Look, I'm sorry, I'm a to-do list kind of person. If I don't write it down, then it will vanish from my mind, never to be seen again. And the task that we're remembering is... audio fix, yes. Streams. Now, I just have to manage to convince future me to prioritize this over, say... Baldur's Gate. Thinking... can't stop with the Baldur's Gate. Okay, that's in the streaming category. Coolio Badulio. Then I need to finish those other pending art tasks, but that is for another time. For right now, we're taking on the most pending art task, which is to say Miquella. Now, do I expect to finish Miquella by the end of the month? No. Like, the answer could have been maybe, but we've already got some other plans. We've got the Magma Art Day, which we may do, or I may actually... honestly, we may make that another Gartic one and save Magma for the future. I feel like Magma ought to be kind of like a big event thing, like an anniversary or the completion of a challenge or some such. I feel like it's not really good for this. So we may come back to Magma in the future, but definitely more Gartic stuff, a little more fun things to do. And then this is just a really unexpectedly busy month. When I filled out my calendar at first, at the start, I had like 2 things on it. And I've got like 15. Not that I'm complaining, it's actually kind of nice to do things. But it does mean that I'm not quite able to dedicate as much time as I had perhaps originally intended. Not to say we'll be missing any more streams, unless something else catches me off guard. We should be clear for pretty much every stream for the rest of the month. The one singular potential exception I can see is Sunday the 27th. Dagnab handwriting. How do you make a 2 look like a 7? Anywho. I like writing, like, not like essays and stuff, but like the art of writing characters themselves. And again, not like people, but like the letter G or something. But it means I sometimes get experimental with it. And then they don't look intelligible anymore. So past me, maybe chill on that way of drawing a 7. In any case, the crossbar looked like the bottom of the 2. Anyway, that's irrelevant. The point is, we may have some hiccups there just because I've got a potentially late night right before it. But otherwise, I think we should be in the clear to keep this stuff going. So, oh, my back. In the spirit of keeping some energy going before next month, when Swordtember hits, hard to believe that's a month away, I wonder if it's even, like, active on Tumblr at all. I don't want to go back to Twitter. I have, like, no engagement on other platforms, but I also didn't really have much engagement on Twitter because I didn't use it. But, like, you could post something on Twitter and people would just see it. You post it on Tumblr and it's like, I haven't figured out how to navigate it yet. But we'll get there. We will get there. Social media magic is not my magic. I'm not proficient in it. But I might be able to hobble my way through it. And until then, we can keep up with the stinking Miquella Elden Ring art. Because I am, apparently, incapable of drawing Miquella. At least in any reasonable amount of time. So, let's see. Yeah, I knew we'd mess with the brush sizing. I think we left off at like a 17 or some such. May have been a 25. 17 feels reasonably suitable for this canvas too. I can lean in a little more. I've noticed I tend to be heavier handed at the start of streams than at the end. Like, just naturally I'll gravitate towards like a middle range, and then by the end I've loosened up a lot, and I'm like more able to keep it reasonable. But that's not the issue right now. The issue right now is figuring out what to do next, because basically this is sort of the challenge of doing a long piece like this where we're taking gaps and stuff. Is and honestly, it's reassuring about one thing, but we've done so many other practices since the last time we've done this that not only is my process like largely different from where it was, so the stage we left off at isn't like a normal break point for me anymore. I also feel like I've gotten better at it, and looking at the old stuff's like, oh, do I want to finish this? But in the name of actually finishing it and not having this be a pet project for all of eternity, I am going to, because I mean we're in the second half of the year already. I think I started this in February, y'all. Maybe April. It's been too long regardless. No, because the return was May, so it had to have been before like that. Anyway, a lot of months. And rather than getting stuck in that loop of working on it a bit, tweaking it, going and doing some other stuff, coming back and wanting to scrap it, we're going to commit. We're going to finish it roughly where it's at. Don't get me wrong, we may do like some changes and stuff, but I'm not going to try to make it perfect. I'm just going to try to make it finished. And I think that still gives us a lot of room for interesting stuff. For example, we've been talking about moving this arm, and we have the leeway to do that. I've been thinking about re-angling the face, but we'd have to reshift the shoulder and do a whole bunch more stuff, which again, might be worth doing, but it might also take up the entire stream, and then we make no progress again. Or at least a little bit of progress, but not where we need to be making it. Because frankly, I'd like to get away from the line work and get the next stages on this, because the next stages are what I actually enjoy. But we do need to get the line work far enough along to do that. And some of that is just dealing with fabrics that I'm not familiar with. Some of that is dealing with the weapon we haven't drawn. Some of that is fixing the stinking arm angle, because I still haven't managed to make this like a dynamic pose yet. And this may be too extreme, just because it would look a little bit like he's just walking. But on the other hand, dramatic view of Miquella walking with this Shotel also works, and actually could give us a different backdrop. Wouldn't put us like immediately in the action, but we've sort of, that was like 16 iterations ago. So, rather than mumbling to myself anymore, I think that let's just grab the color we were using. Yeah, didn't realize it was that light of a gray, which doesn't look light in this context. But when you put it next to the black, you're like, oh, huh, like this one, right? Yeah. Cool. And then we'll take the advice we left ourselves last time. I'm actually going to hide the sketch layers real quick so we can just deal with this. I may ignore this advice, but if I do consider it, it will only be after we finish with this arm, basically. Because somehow the pose of this art piece is still haunting me. Why? The angle of the belt, too. Like, every time I look at it, I'm realizing it really should, like, arc up a little bit. And, like, the low point should be in the center. Is anyone with me that looks like it makes more sense? And then we can just kind of have these be funky creases and such. Once again, for the line work layer, this has a lot of scratchy stuff, but also, like, a lot of detail it shouldn't. So yeah, we're in a weird place with this one, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But rather than letting that throw us completely off, we're just going to keep powering forward. And probably consider doing another line work layer above this later, but just in case we don't, I want to leave this a little bit decent. Like, it don't got to be perfect, but it can be passable. See, now that feels like it arcs too much, though. Like it's sagging or something. And like maybe we really need it to be like that? Well, that feels even like it'd be more saggy though. Okay, hold on. I know at some point recently on one of the sketch layers we figured out leg placement, which also tells us hip placement, which also tells us belt placement. This is a funky leg placement But it means that the center of the belt's arc should actually be roughly here before it starts arcing up. Well, rather, it should be centered on that line. So the arc up should start there. And we'll clear out some of this other stuff again. Didn't actually want to kill those lines. Do want to kill this one, though. Remember I said that I was going to focus on another thing and not get caught up on the little detail work while I was in the midst of doing exactly that? Yeah. Me neither. But let us continue. In this more, we'll have to clean up the width of the belt. I just want to see if I can get it to where my gut instinct doesn't say, "Ew, that's off-putting," and then we can move on. Of course, that's like I feel most Stardust goals, and it's still hard to do. So okay, we can hide the leg placement and some of that stuff again. Yeah, I won't lie, it still feels like it dips a little too much, but that looks a lot less bad. Why not just go over the same line a few more times? Mainly because I can merge vector lines, so if I can get this center arc a little less steep, but still pretty smooth, then we can work with that. Zoop. 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 Okay. Oh, and there's a stray bit over there. Cool, clean that up. Probably place down another one by accident in the same spot. We'll see. But we've got this. Again, we've still got a little too heavy-handed on the line work, but that's okay. We make this slightly milder just because of the angle. And we'll have to sort this out. So that's going to change that dynamic a little bit. Actually, I think that needs to continue. Yeah, okay, cool. There we go. That's starting to look... makes the angle of this like a little bit too steep. Like it kind of needs to be more down, more around, or some such. Basically not landing quite so close to the center. That's okay. That's something we can work with. So if we once again look at leg placement. Yeah. It's a weird twist. Not the best twist in the world. But it's, you know, plausible. It's workable. And more importantly, it gives us an excuse to move on. So, focusing on the arm like I said I would, let's actually have a go at this. I don't know if we want to arc it quite this far out, but I kind of feel like maybe we actually genuinely do. Okay. But I am going to just clear most of that out. Because we learned a little bit about how we wanted the arms to taper when we were doing the other arm. We learned a little bit more about the hands. We do need to know the angle of this hand. What I may do... Let's see. We know that the angle of this thing is specifically like that. So we can go ahead and hide the sketch layer. We can worry less about this somewhat vague line. And slightly more about something more tangential as we figure out the real hand placement. Because this hand, while not the worst, wasn't aligned right. And again, if in any case, that was more of a draft hand and not a finalized one for the style we've been going for of late. So using this as our arm guideline, it does feel like maybe it arcs a tiny bit high up. If you're holding something like that, I don't know. Usually exaggerating the pose a little bit ain't the end of the world. I'm going to bring it down just the tiniest hair. Not a ton, just the tiny little hair. That way we've still got our pretty strong pose. Whoops, not that tool again. Keep hitting the wrong... I've noticed this even with Baldur's Gate and like a few other games, is that if I remove my hand from my keyboard, I lose my positioning immediately, like my sense of which section it's on, and I'm hitting the wrong keys. It's been a while since I've used like a proper like keyboard and mouse controlled game, other than My Sims, which does not have combat intensity like Baldur's Gate does. But Elden Ring got me used to controller, and now going back to like trying to navigate with the keyboard and mouse and everything, it's still taking me a little bit of shifting around. We're getting there though. A little more reliable each time. Okay. Now let's think this through. We got a wrist here. These fingers are going to be wrapping around more like that. That's fine. They'll be in the palm. Going to put thumb. Okay, hold on. Thinking this through once again. From our perspective, pretty sure the palm should be on the other side, shouldn't it? No, that feels very wrong. Someone's running at you with that. Okay, yep. Interesting. Ugh. This is kind of what we were sort of sorting out with the other one. You've got like palm doing that, and then thumb loops back down around on this one. Like something like that. Anyway, that's just for placement. The one I really worry about is the arm here. And then we'll shift the hand around again to make that work, basically. That lines up well with the delt. We've got baggy enough sleeves that we can probably get away with having that there. I'm trying to remember how baggy of sleeves we were even looking at with Miquella. I want to say they were short sleeves. And then, once again, we need to consider gravity and our angle when drawing those. And also foreshortening. If the show tell is going to get that big, this hand does actually legitimately need to be bigger. And even this part of the arm probably needs to be bigger than it's currently looking. Yet though we've got a really extreme foreshortening thing going on. Whoa, okay, let's undo that. But still need some amount of proportioning happening here. Okay. Zip-a-doop-a-deep-up. Okay, here we go. Seeing the arm from underneath, you're going to see some interesting, like, shapes. Like you're gonna have like an actual, like, elbow protrusion, I guess. And this is going to be more. I think the silhouette needs to be left alone, and we just need to like lean into it a little more like that. This one is feeling a little more natural too. But maybe that's just because it's like kind of the mental schema I have of the arm. Or maybe because it's reasonable. We'll start with that. I still think it's... Given how much is going to get covered by sleeve, I think it's reasonable. Let's look at our reference here. We've got Izetta, once again not our character, but one from an Art Fight Attack. This sleeve isn't following gravity at all, is it? And that one's... Ay. Y'all have no idea how excited I am to get to, like, once we have a color flat in here, and we're actually, like, doing our values and all of that. I am so excited to get to that point. Because once we get to that point, that's not to say that it's easy breezy freewheeling or whatever. Like, because we're trying to really go above and beyond on this one and do a level of detail that we haven't been doing in other pieces. However, it's typically the part I enjoy more. I am learning. Maybe what I ought to do is like gain the skills to be a colorist and see if like I can join some webcomic or something. Because I've noticed about myself, like, I very much am the sort who enjoys the craft more than the art, so to speak. And what I mean by that, and I don't know if I'm using this entirely correctly, but, like, I don't necessarily enjoy the coming up with new characters and storylines. I don't have, like, a tale to tell, so to speak. At least not in my art. I don't know, the stuff I've got life experience with isn't the kind of stuff that I care about telling stories about, you know? Like, it's just not really what I'm interested in doing. But I enjoy, like, attempting the art itself, and learning how the color and value works, learning, like, other handcrafts. Like, sewing following a pattern is super my jam. I'm very much like a process kind of guy. So, like, I'm slowly learning how that fits together with the world of art. Okay. Here we go. Okay, here we go. That's getting... The problem is that this is such a sheer fabric on Miquella that, like, there's not a whole lot of, like, creasing and wrinkling I would actually expect it to do. Or rather, I expect it to have a lot of very soft ones and not, like, really major defining ones, which is a challenge. We'll figure out exactly how that needs to go. But it's a challenge because, like, I kind of enjoy the, like, simplified, bolder lines and stuff. Partly because I truthfully just don't have the patience for, like, the super nuanced things. Like, they're lovely. They're absolutely lovely, don't get me wrong. I love when I see one. But, like, I just legitimately don't like, necessarily enjoy getting to that level of detail, at least not in every piece. Like, it's fun in certain ones, like when you're really taking your time with it, but in the smart way, not like the dumb way we've been doing with this. These have, like, a weird parallel rhythm to them that I'm not vibing with. As does that. Everything's got... Okay, I mean, and that could even, like... Okay, there we go. Just had to, like, mix it up a little bit. I'm very bad at being, like, free-flowing with my art. That's not to say that I'm incapable of it. Certainly not, and I don't think it's just like, oh, my art's garbage, I can't do this. It's just, it's something that I'd like to work on, because I know that it's something I've struggled with for ever, in any medium. Creativity is, like, the biggest challenge for me a lot of the time. You know what, yeah, actually, it just looks better like that. I'm gonna have to figure out how the outer edge is gonna work, because I feel like it needs to, like, this doesn't seem right. We can maybe clear that out. Clear a little of that out. Like, being able to see into it also doesn't seem right. The aggressive verticality of it is also a little weird. Like, thinking about the feet positions. Feels like maybe it should be, like, wavering that way a little bit. But again, this feels like... Maybe it's just that it feels like too tight of a sleeve and we need to, like, loosen things up a little bit. Let's try clearing a little bit of this rubble out. I don't know about y'all, when I'm doing the vectoral anaraces and it leaves little, like, shards of random nonsense, I always think of it as rubble. That, I mean, looks less... It looks closer to what I'd want it to. It's not there yet, but it is much closer. Okay. It just feels like there should be... How do I put this? Like, more scraggling happening. Like, more tension lines, but I cannot, for the life of me, figure out where they need to be. And just going all in like that doesn't really work. Without, like, edge agreements, coordination. Pardon me on that. While we work on figuring that out, of course, we've got plenty of time to work on other things. We can give that one a little pause. And we can either look at the hand. Let's look at the overall pose first. How we looking? Looks like he's having... It looks a little bit like he's having a conversation with someone over you, which is intriguing. One thing that is going to solidify a part of this pose, and what I may as well do next, just because it's going to take a little doing, besides fixing the sleeve, because... There we go. Normal elbow. I mean, even this is still, like, too much baggy. We can have it hint up a little bit, but that's too much baggy. It also has the same, like, the edge feels like it ought to have more going on issue, but, like, what going on is still not... My mind is neglecting to inform me of that little piece. So we'll look at that. What we really need to work on is the shoulder. If I can close this out a little bit, get a better sense of, like, face and head and all, then, that would be good. And since the figure, as we've sort of been actually figuring out the line of action from the sketches, it feels a little bit like they're rotating more towards us, and I'm kind of okay with that. But it does mean I'm going to bring this leg's motion more into the center. Clear some of this out. Actually may just repurpose that line. Okay, come on, sketch layer. Show us leg placement. Oh, that's right. That other leg's actually a fair ways back, so maybe we do want this, like even if we move this leg to be less moving immediately out of our view, which I guess would mean that this one needs to rotate slightly more into our view. Still looks like he's walking past us, just with less confidence, so, yeah. How do we make that work? Because this is like definitely a bold knee forward pose. Like if the knee's there, and we've got like the fabric draping behind it, that's like a lot of action happening with that side. So what should be happening behind it? Because I've like indecisively made 3 separate positions over here, and that's not going to work. Do we still want it billowing forwards? I feel like the answer for composition would be yes, but for this making any sort of sense at all as a pose, kind of needs to be no. However, actually, rather than deleting that whole string, I feel like we can just move them around a little bit and maybe achieve what we're looking for. Enough, a few of the straggly ones. No, it looks like he's stumbling. Because my brain's interpreting this leg as being there, and that leg as being there. It's not stable. Moving forwards too quickly, it's a little weird, so more of a confident stance might be good. Then it just makes this motion a little bizarre. Because if both legs are forward, that's also not balanced. So perhaps this one is more back? Which, of course, just turns this into a weird front view. Okay, nope. I'm going to go back to the listening to the original advice, not messing with that stuff nearly so much. Let's revert it to where it was. we've got that dynamic going there. Let's just like scoot this center point a little more, which means we're gonna have to adjust the belt again, but yeah, whatever. And like the chest a little bit, because but we can still do that, and that's why I was talking about the shoulder, and sort of why I'm looking at this before the shoulder, is how we draw this shoulder here is going to sort of solidify the rotation of the chest more than this one has. Because again, we built this all the wrong way. We did our posing with bad proportion structures. We did bizarre foreshortening choices that I'm still fine with, even though they're a little ambitious, perhaps. But it's a lot that we're having to sort of deal with. That's legacy. It's like tech debt for art. It's legacy ideas that aren't necessarily useful for their current situation. But we got them, so. Okay, let's see. I can't clear some of that up a little bit. Shift that motion once again kind of more away from us, moving past us, but still has sickle at the ready right over us. I think that's giving us an interesting... Jeepers, that's a bad curve. I don't... Look, I am with the faction that doesn't like lines of action, and it's not to say that they're inherently bad. And especially this piece could have probably benefited from a different way of using them than I did back in the day. Pardon me, but like I always found that they didn't correspond meaningfully with anything else in the sketch, and they ended up just making it more stiff than if I actually just went for it with like starting with the torso and the hips, and not, again, this box method also made stuff stiff compared to what we've been doing of late, which gives us a lot more variety to work with. You can sort of anticipate how that's connected. You can see how arms, and like this, immediately it's coming together with perspective. It's turning into like that top hat totem frog. Cane outstretched. And like, but look, I mean, immediately, we could even push this angle more probably if we really wanted to. We could move the head more forward and like angle our little Among Us chess piece here even more as well. For the record, this is an art technique I learned before Among Us was popular. It genuinely isn't one of the tutorials based on it, but nowadays, if someone was to reteach it, could be. And look at that. Dynamic pose, instant, like, recognizable proportions, and, like, perspective, and, like, no time. But using that old box method, I just kept stinking everything in. Okay, well, we're gonna put away a little dancing fellow. Actually, gonna bring back little dancing fellow. Thank you, Redo Buffer, for being fairly generous. I'm gonna put little dancing fellow on a different layer, minus the one leg that's overlapping things, because I kind of like him for a thumbnail. Because Miquella, that's the other thing, is like Miquella not the best in like for streaming and for like VOD SEO either, is like because we're doing the same stuff so many times. Little, I was gonna call it little guy. Okay, because we're doing the same stuff, like it's terrible thumbnails. just the worst. All right, so we got little guy. We'll scoot little guy. But like this pose, we could have straightened up so much more and made better. But I'm not starting it from scratch. So help me, not again. If we want to start it from scratch, we can do a different Miquella piece later. For now, we're doing this one. But for now, I'm actually going to take a restroom break real quick. So I'll see y'all in just a couple moments. Howdys and salutations once again, y'all. Sorry for the wait. So, I realized that I've been talking a lot about the art itself and the art process, and I mean, this is an art stream, so that makes no small amount of sense. Hold on, sitting back down, I figured out one thing that won't fix the sleeve, but will make it marginally better. So, angle, there we go, better. Not perfect, but better. Even better. And like, really the apex ought to be like maybe further back. And like maybe less of this. Anywho, we'll come back to that later. The point was, I realized used to on these streams I would talk about like random thoughts on what I've been up to and like shows I've been watching. But part of it's busyness, but part of it is like I haven't like watched a lot of shows lately, truth be told. I mean, I've never been like a huge I would get caught on like one TV show or something for a while, but I would never be like, or at least it's been a very long time since I watched much in the way of TV or shows. When I was very little, it was like young Nickelodeon and things like that. Like what am I like Moose and Z Noggin, whatever the heck that was on. Like when I was really young. And then after that, I basically just kind of shifted into YouTube. I didn't watch a lot of TV. Like, I watched some stuff with the family, like Star Trek and Star Wars and things of that sort. And, like, Psych, that was a fun show. But all that was on Netflix anyway. Like, I've never really been a cable TV kid. And so, like, I shifted into YouTube for a while, and then some friends got me really into anime, which has been fun. But I've landed in hindsight, what should have been obvious was going to be a much deeper, like, obsession, addiction, time sink thing. And that is manga. Because I have a much longer history of being interested, without ever having really thought of it. Like, I'm a huge comics fan. But I feel like when I always thought of, like, what's a comics fan, my first thought was, like, Marvel and DC. And I've still never read any of those, actually. Like, I've seen a lot of the movies and Avengers and stuff, but I didn't really grow up reading those. So I missed out on that whole world, and so I wasn't really interested. And then by the time I learned about it, it was through like stereotypes, not of like, oh, nerds or whatever, but specifically of like the nitpicky garbage Twitter gets up to. Where people are like super hostile over tiny arbitrary changes or things they dislike. And so I wasn't that keen to get involved. I know that's the majority of the communities aren't that way, as is true with any fandom, but you get the obnoxious ones and they really taint it for everyone, don't they? Okay, let's see. I was wondering what was going on with collar and stuff. We've sort of shifted it again. That's fine. I do think I want most of the shoulder obscured, though. I want this center line to be more that direction. Legs are already facing kind of too much towards us. The leg placement really ought to have been more... Well, I'm not going to mess with it now. But oriented less at the viewer, in hindsight. Alternatively, we could make the whole thing more at the viewer, which would make us have to adjust the hands, which is fine. And then we could have like an actual face that's sort of looking at it. Wow, both of those arcs are bad. I've watched an excellent Love Life drawing video, which highly recommend that group, by the way. Great classes on practical tips. That's been so helpful in identifying stupid because I've always had trouble with this, like, making the circles like fit right. And angling them in ways that work. I said on the leg placement layer. Anyway, and like he ran through a couple of common mistakes, and I was immediately able to see, oh, that's what I'm doing. Because I could never like get the arc right, because the arc never looked like it would actually go around the sphere. But if I can just do like a complete circle that actually lines up with it, oops, and like doesn't get itself erased. But like now we've got arcs that arc believably, and it's something we can work on and like angle more. But like doing the full circle helps, or at least it makes it easier to tell when something is wildly wrong, and to get a pinpoint on where like the front should be, stuff like that. So in any case, we could have Miquella looking more at us. We'll see. But But yeah, we'll keep working on that, and the shoulder and the alignment. But back to the not watching a lot of shows lately, because while I didn't read those comics, I did grow up on like newspaper comics, and like compilations of Wizard of Id and Pearls Before Swine and a few like that. One that I remember was a dog, a cat, and a vacuum cleaner, which I realize narrows it down a whole bunch. But I don't. Pooch Cafe. Holy cow, it was Pooch Cafe. I couldn't remember the name of that for the longest time. In any case, like some of those, and then like, well, I'm saying like a lot. All those speaking classes and like pseudo Toastmasters things wear off when I'm a little sleepy, huh? Oh well, we'll keep on going. Because honestly, streaming's actually given me energy today. It had truthfully been quite a long day, and I wasn't sure I was going to even be able to like talk. I almost did like a 1-hour Stardew stream, and I was like, no, let's do this. Let's actually try. And forcing yourself to be a little energetic, like speaking, really does improve the mood. I may, in the future, when I'm having like sleepy streams, rather than going all in on the sleepy, I may go somewhat in on the less sleepy. See where that gets us. Or I may forget because I'll be sleepy. In any case, somewhere around like 2011, 2012, I discovered the world of webcomics. Through a couple of, I mean, my dad had read XKCD for much longer than that, so I knew about that one forever, but I never really thought about it the same way. And, okay, hold on. Before I get talking too much, I need to think through where I was looking. Shoulder. Yeah, let's think about shoulder. Think about structure. 1 second. I need to think it through. I don't want to change the pose significantly, but I do need to think through what the structure that's happening here is. So let's do it. But that's something that I can do while talking, I think, probably. Got shoulders somewhere up here. Yes, okay. The perspective on this makes it complicated. While I do this, maybe I can't do this while talking. Jeepers. At least about anything other than it, or the concept of talking. Hey, turn it into an olive so much. Well. Oh, this isn't a vector layer? No, okay, no, hold on. Let's try that again. It was discovery, sure. But yeah, but especially like the one I really remember early on that got me into it was a little like there was a My Little Pony one back in the day called Moonstuck, which in hindsight was a very obvious parody of Homestuck, at least in terms of title and text interactive story. Although it was definitely like, well, I never saw Homestuck while it was live, so I don't know how interactive it actually was with the readers. But Moonstuck always felt like the readers actually had like a fairly significant impact on the world. Whereas reading back on Homestuck in hindsight, it feels like there was always path where that's where it was going, and the readers like could sort of like they could control like the funniness of moments and stuff, but like they didn't seem like they could really control direction. Which again, both of them are perfectly reasonable approaches to storytelling. Like, let's maybe try that again. Alright, just trying to figure out the arc of this particular one because it's at a weird angle. Perhaps the issue is that it's not at a weird angle. Okay. We'll figure that out. But I got really into Moonstuck. Like, found it about like halfway through its run, maybe a little earlier, a little later, and then followed it like obsessively all the way to the end. And the whole cartographer's map and all of those joys. And underwater basket weaving. That's when I first learned about that joke. And a bunch of fun things. And the rocks. Yeah. Anyway, always liked Moonstuck. And then through that whole fandom, I discovered a million other webcomics. But pretty quickly, I also started running into stuff outside of the fandom. Like one I remember running into. Oh, jeepers. It ended in 2008. I don't think I found it until like 2014? Maybe 15, maybe 13. Somewhere in that range. Was Ozzy and Millie, which was just a cute kind of slice of life. They had some political commentary, some grown-up commentary. Very fun. Had a 10-year run. All the political jokes were from stuff that was completely irrelevant by the time I was reading it. So it made them less... I'm not usually that keen on political humor, although I guess I was more when I was a little younger. this way, it's not off-putting. And so I quite enjoyed Ozzy and Millie, and that led me into another one called Precocious, which is a similar style of comic with a bunch of very fun little gremlin kids. Unfortunately, the artist for that one has been dealing with some chronic diseases for many years, so it's been on a very long hiatus. Which, again, I still check the website. I still got it in my RSS. I will absolutely show back up like the day it comes back if it ever does. But personal health has to come first sometimes, you know. I can already tell that there's some proportions issues with even my guide trying to match it. So let's maybe try this again. I'm gonna just scooch. Let's find some reference points first. We already know we have a hip there. We appear to have another one over there, which makes this belt all sorts of nonsense, but we'll get there. Jeepers, I've forgotten how to do this hip shape entirely. In any case, sorry this is such like a slow and broken story as I'm like trying to tell it while doing this weird like pseudo-technical stuff. But yeah, I enjoyed that one, and then I slowly, like between that and XKCD and a few others, like and eventually found like Hiveworks and Top Webcomics. Although Top Webcomics has so many problems. But generally through those, I began to find a ton of other comics, and I've like, then it just exploded. I think by the time I was in college, I was following like 150 some odd different like indie webcomics. Like absolutely having a blast with those. And like, I don't know, even then, like into the pandemic and stuff, following comics was what got me through. Well, not got me through it, but it was a nice form of entertainment, a nice way to escape a lot of what was happening, because pandemic was crazy. The situation was crazy, and how people responded to it was also crazy, and it was just a bad time all around. But I suspect most of my viewers have witnessed it and lived through it, because it wasn't that long ago. You shouldn't be watching Twitch if you're like a year old. And for the record, the pandemic's still there, but I mean like the high point of the chaos and stress was really like 2020, obviously, and 2021. Politics exacerbated that, at least over here in the States, but that's neither here nor there. The bigger point is, y'all all witnessed that. You remember the chaos. And I read comics through that whole mess, through all of it. I love comics. Supported some of my favorite ones on Patreon and Kickstarters, even though shipping times were terrible because of the paper shortage for a while. But I was happy to wait because I had the web version, so this was more of just a cool thing I was getting to do, like a bonus one where I got to see it. Like Widdershins and Twin Dragons and Drive for a long time. A lot of fun ones. I mean, there's dozens. Kind of fell off of Gilded Age. Gilded Age was interesting, and then like it got into a lot of like philosophy that I didn't necessarily. I wasn't necessarily a complete fan of the politics that they ended up leaning into as it went on. And that's not to say that it was bad or that those politics are bad. They just weren't like enjoyable to read as lighthearted, which again, it's a serious comic, so you know, it is what it is. My point is, it's not a critique. It's just the reason that I personally like shifted away from it a little bit. Gunnar Krigg Court I got into much later than it started, but it's a fun one. I still follow that one. I used to have 3 that I followed with W's because I thought that's how I remembered them. There was Widdershins. It wasn't Gilded Age, but I don't even remember the other W one. And then there was Will Save World for Gold, which is another one that was enjoyable, and then there were some choices made that I was just like, ugh. Oh, and Wergy, which same deal, actually. Enjoyable, and then some choices made that I was just like, oh, okay. Still, I hope all the best for those comics. Like, I got many actual years of enjoyment out of those. But the point is, I get like obsessive about comics. I'm the kind who will binge like a 20-year archive over the course of 3 days in every free second I have, and a few seconds that definitely weren't free, but I did it anyway. Like I love comics. So I should have known better than to get the stinking like Viz manga app thing. Viz is apparently one of like the not US, but English translators of a lot of manga. Along with Is Kodansha a translator, or are they like just a publisher that also does English releases? I don't really fully understand the whole structure. I'll be honest, I don't know it. Yeah, this hip thing still ain't even remotely representative of where the hips are, but I think that's because the hips are in like 3 separate states. Quantum hips. I don't know what's up with them. But we'll keep working on it. I do think we figured out Torso as at least one of the possible interpretations of how it could be facing. This has gone through so many structures and iterations, even like the V2. There's so much mess with this. Oh well, we will keep at it. Not giving up. Should probably give up, but we're not going to. I know we want that one, we don't want this one. Here we go. But yeah, no, I've got it, and then I learned that they've got like a fairly cheap subscription that you can just read a whole bunch of them as they release, which this is not sponsored or promoted, by the way. And actually, I feel a little bad because I actually went to an anime convention and I was shopping at one of the manga stalls, and the person was griping about like a little bit, like just as a passing, like, you know, just venting a tiny bit, like one line about how like the new Viz app was going to run them out of business, and I hadn't heard of it, and so I went and looked it up, and so they accidentally advertised the thing that was destroying them to me. So I feel a little bad about that, but like I still like buying the hard copy ones too, and that vendor was cheaper than some of the other stuff, so I'm, you know, it was all good. Like they haven't actually lost me or anything like that. But yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with the with that Viz like subscription, catching up and discovering like a lot of the fun of like stuff I'd seen in anime, and then seeing the actual like voice and style of the manga behind it is just really enjoyable. And a few that like I hadn't seen before, like Freerun. Holy cow, Freerun packs more emotional punch than most any media I've ever encountered. At least in the early part. I'll admit later on there's like a level up challenge arena, and from that point onward it felt like a lot of the emotional like poignancy kind of faded as it shifted more into like that was just a really long arc, and then after that there was continued arcs on more of the pains of current day rather than like the original theme, which was more of the pangs of the past mixed with like making the most of current day. Anyway, it's a whole thing. It's all still interesting. It's interesting philosophically, and the villain characters are an interesting, like, they're not really a twist, but for manga they're a twist. Because there's this idea that like they're fighting demons and stuff, and it's a background at first, but it becomes a main part of the plot. It's never really background, but the degree of it showing up becomes more. Anyway, but a big thing about them is that they can sound and communicate in order to deceive, but they really are like heartless, like truly, truly cruel, evil, deceptive, like you actually see in a lot of, you know, the Western religion, and eventually like even like the Middle Eastern predecessors to all of that. But like so many manga lean into the like allegorical demons versus in such a way, like, you know what I mean, where they're actually just allegories for people, so they're very much just people emotions and reactions. And so like you end up with these very lighthearted, very friendly, likable like technically demon characters. But Freerun does not do that. It's I've been quite enjoying its take on things. But much more so is the like, it's not nostalgia. I don't entirely know, because okay, this isn't the dictionary definition of either of these words, but I feel like in my mind I've sort of separated out nostalgia from like sentimentality. Mainly by not the type of emotion they are, but the way people react when they experience either of them. Because to me, nostalgia has become almost a bad word. We live in an era where so many people are looking back to golden ideas of the past that were super, super fake, or just made up in the last like year claiming to be past, or just a lot of like manipulating how we perceive the past in order to convince people of really stupid present actions. Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see why perhaps some of the weightiness on this is a little off, but at least I feel like I can see what the pose was, and that helps with some things. I may need to just assume a billowing wind as opposed to like the striding motion for some of this, but that's, yes, we'll get there. It changes like the fabric flow a little bit, but we'll get there. But, and I'm gonna tweak the hips a little bit so that I can like shift some other stuff around to make it work. Whew. But like getting back to the nostalgia versus sentimentality, like in my mind, sentimentality is like the fond look on the past. You're like, oh, I remember the happiness of the past. That was nice. Like you can look at an object and it gives you like a fond memory. Whereas nostalgia is not just appreciating the past. Like sentimentality is appreciating good things in the past, or at least things that made you feel good. Nostalgia has almost become more of this like desire for those good things of the past, almost like in many cases to an obsessive level, but even in smaller cases to a not obsessive but just problematic degree. But it's not just appreciating what was, but it's a desperation to go back, almost a really like frequently dangerous desire to go back. And so often it's for a back that never was, and so often it's results in people doing terrible things today because they can't bring themselves to find joy in the current day or like to even look for positives. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of terrible situations right now. I'm not saying like, oh, there's always a silver lining. For some people, the situation is very bad. Don't get me wrong. However, we've been like, the past wasn't necessarily like this golden age that we need to go back to. At least not for everyone. Certainly not for everyone. But it feels like culturally we've gotten very obsessed with it. Huh, that's interesting. This almost implies that the torso is entirely too large. Wide. Hold on, because this is... Actually, if we're matching it with the body, it's even more. A little more there. And it feels like that ain't necessarily right, because the hips should generally be noticeably wider than the rib cage. We can tweak the hips a little bit too. We'll work with this. We'll make this work. But like it's become this sort of obsession for nostalgic things, and it's like an unhealthy. It's the desire to go back, and not just appreciating what was, but like wanting it, often desperately, not always. And like, I don't remember what originally set this on, but free run is sort of like an experiment or an experience of that sentimentality. Like, there's a bittersweetness to it, but it's not like a desperate, angry bittersweetness. It's not like it's curdling. It's just the like, oh, I should have appreciated that more, but I can at least appreciate it now and make the best of what is now. And in Fryron's case, that's a good course of action. Again, I'm not saying that's where everyone's at, or necessarily the best thing to do in every situation, but like, let's maybe not go crazy on that, but we can sort of get it in there. Yeah. We'll see on this. But it's been very enjoyable on that front. I've appreciated free run a lot, and I wouldn't have found it without like switching to manga or however you want to say it. Because I'll admit, I binged I absolutely binged Sleepy Princess in the Demon Castle because it is like my. Is it even a guilty pleasure? I just unabashedly really like it, even though I acknowledge it's definitely not deep or lighthearted. Or it is lighthearted. It's not deep, but I like it. It's very fun. And then like some of the other ones that I watched, I was like, oh, I wonder what the manga for that's like. Like Tonikawa, which, don't get me wrong, interesting plot, interesting stuff going on, but way too much. Like, it feels like they lean more and more into the fan servicey stuff as it goes on, and like I got the same impression as I started into season 2 of the anime. So I've sort of put that one on hold for now, at least for my viewing. I'm sure it's still lovely. And same all of the above for Comey Can't Communicate. Also lovely, also fun, but like one of the characters I like the most has sort of been relegated to background character. And the main story seems to have leaned more and more into parts that weren't what I enjoyed from it. So like, and then they got some like really bizarre love triangle stuff going on that I was just not interested in. That's not to say it's bad. I mean, I still caught up on both of those mangas completely to current day. At least everything they had on the app. And the app has current day. It just usually has a gap from a few months ago. So, this is turning rather egg-shaped, ominously. Our center line implies that the head should maybe orient more up? Like even less in view? But then this is like almost becoming a creeping pose. Perhaps let's rethink the angle of the legs and of the hips with them. And like, that'll affect our fabric again, but yeah, I think it's worth doing. I know I said I wasn't going to mess with things, and I was just going to finish it as is, but as is was getting really stinking weird with this section. I couldn't figure out where anything needed to go, so gotta work out the underlying structure a little better again. And this, for the record, is not the best way to do it either. Trying to map it to what we've already drawn. A fresh start would probably be better, but just psychologically, I don't think I can bring myself to do it right now. Come on, there we go. But then I found things like Freerun, which I've just really enjoyed. It reminds me a lot of, well, it's Assassination Classroom in a way, because Freerun is serious from the start. It's got its lighthearted moments, but it's definitely like somewhat somber right from the get-go. You kind of know what you're signing up for with it, pretty much out the gate. Whereas Assassination Classroom starts out super silly and lighthearted, and it keeps that energy throughout the whole thing, but it also gets increasingly, serious and thoughtful, and that's really fun too. I like both kinds of things. I like the ones like Sleepy Princess where the characters still have development, actually, shockingly. The story is moving forward, but it's also just silly, lighthearted stuff a lot of the time too. But I also like the ones where there's more depth. What I don't like are stinking dystopian stories. Stories about the bad choices people make, and the consequences of those choices as a warning. Because people don't listen to the warnings, and reading that stuff is too much like living through stuff now. Like, I feel like I can get the lessons without bringing myself into another world of misery, you know? And I definitely, like... I know, apparently at least, a lot of people really enjoy stories where, like, the characters have a lot of suffering as a sort of, like, what's the word for it? It's not, like, enjoying their pain. It's not sadism. It's more of, like, the release of their pain also lets you get a, like, emotional release, too. I forget there's a word for it. They talk about it in theater a lot. Whatever it is. I genuinely never remember. Not never. So I guess not that genuinely. But I frequently forget what it's called. But basically, it's like getting the emotional release through someone else experiencing the really intense ones, and that usually doesn't work for me. Like, I feel too bad commiserating with the characters to get any, like, release from them going through the hardships. Like, those just make me feel miserable for sometimes like a week afterwards, depending on what it is. And like, one of the examples of this this is stinking wild. One of my least favorite movies of all time, and it's not that it's a bad movie, it's that it makes me feel miserable when I watch it, is It's a Wonderful Life. which from the name you can tell that I'm definitely not getting the intended experience from it. But it's true. Like, that movie, the ratio of misery to the ratio of positive payoff doesn't balance. There's so much unpleasantness going on in it. Like, so many just, like, pain after pain after pain. And for the record, the villain gets away with like 10,000 stolen dollars. Scot-free, no consequences. That's not satisfying. I realize it's a story, and maybe their point is that in real life the villains can win and you can win too. I don't know, but like, narratively it's unsatisfying, at least for me. But like the whole like happy payoff at the end is like it's like 3 minutes, or at least it feels like 3 minutes. It's not nearly enough to get out of the funk of misery. And even though, like, yes, it's wonderful to see the community come together and for this fellow to realize he's in fact appreciated and important and needed. Hold on. This is definitely not right. Although that is a much better, like, abstracted leg than I've drawn in a while. It's not where that leg should be. But like, I don't know, I still felt just like grimy and sad after that movie. And ones that lean into it so much that I literally can't even watch them are things like Shield Hero, which is a misery fest. Because, partly because they want you to sympathize with this dude who is absolutely down and like being treated horribly start to finish. Although apparently there is eventually like some amount of justice. But then they do the heroic thing where they don't actually get like full vengeance, which is the heroic thing to do, but also to some extent, like in a story like that, the acts are so criminal that you would rather have justice. At least it feels that way. But I couldn't even get through like episode 5 for 2 reasons. One of them being the misery fest was just laying it on so heavy that like I felt myself physically like it would me watching one episode felt like 2 hours, like a full-length stinking movie, and it would leave me feeling awful for the entire day and the day after it. It just like would sink into my psyche. Just garbage. Hated experiencing that. The other one was the really terrible slave narrative where someone would volunteer to be a slave again. No, be free and just stick with the dude. No one, 0 people want to go back to being an actual slave. It's the worst. Really stupid. Bad writing on that part. So bad. I get that it's supposed to be symbolic, but that's just terrible. And I feel actually the same way about a show that feels like it's basically Shield Hero Light, which is that like, what is it? Like Sugar Apple Fairy Prince or something like that. Again, good enough show, but it is literally the same situation. Main character gets falsely accused of a ton of stuff, beaten down for basically no reason, has a slave that she keeps around, and then like she treats it nice enough that he decides to stick around as a servant, but at least he's not. Well, is he still bound as a slave? Like, he like refuses the freedom thing again. And it's supposed to be coy, but no, it's the same. It's actually like they're the same show. And then in the end, like the villain is supposed to get comeuppance, and then she just like punches him in the face and laughs and is like, "Hey, no actual repercussions," and then doesn't make any progress. And then repeat as the villain attempts to get her killed repeatedly, and she just laughs it off. And like, she treats him like a Pokemon rival, and he treats her like an opposing soldier in a war. Like, the responses are so imbalanced. It's stupid. Not that the show is stupid. They've got interesting stuff. The whole sugar glass stuff is fascinating. The visuals for it are very lovely. There's a lot to like in that show, but the writing is basically Shield Hero again. And it has basically the same problems as Shield Hero again. But the point is, I can't bring myself to watch stuff like that. It's just leaning into the unpleasantness. Whereas you get stuff like Freerun, which is not like, don't get me wrong, Freerun has a lot of bitter too, like probably more so than the Sugar Apple one. but it's handled in so much more of a way of like processing into acceptance rather than just blindly accepting and being like, hey, and like we'll allow villains to get off scot-free repeatedly so that they can repeat the same crimes. It's like, no. No, there is acceptance, but there is also like following through on what needs to be done. And like, I don't know. There's maybe it's the target audience of shows, but I feel like there's this weird arc of writing where forgiveness is the end all be all. And look, that's a wonderful moral and a good concept, but it also results in people like it's essentially teaching people to not get out of unhealthy situations. Like, you can forgive, but you should also get away from the problem. And if the problem is actively harming other people, then you shouldn't forgive. You need to intervene to prevent further harm. So, like, if there's a lot of what feel like unearned redemption arcs in a lot of anime, Rerun has been much better about that. There's one guy I still don't like, but generally it's been much better about that. Even Stinking Fairy Tale is terrible about that. I was cracking up. Well, not cracking up. At first I was like jaw dropped. Hold on, what? Yeah, what am I doing with that leg? Let's draw the actual pose that we thought this was, and then try to resituate on a pose that it should be and figure out the proportions to match. Because right now I've basically been like drawing what we had sort of stated the pose would be. Right. Oh, jeepers. Oh, arc in. Then arc back. Arc. Yeah, okay. Abstracting legs. I can't get thighs very well yet. Something to work on. We'll keep practicing. So, I don't know. That ended up going down a weird tangent. I'll suffice it to say that I've found a lot of things that I quite enjoy reading right now. But it's a lot of manga, so it's, I don't know, it's like harder to talk about for me. Not that it's like embarrassing or anything. It just like it doesn't come to my mind of like what have I been doing lately. I'm like, oh, manga, I guess. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, like actually a ton of stuff. Okay, yeah, this is stinking. This pose that we sort of penciled in last time is very messy, so let's try not to do that. Let's figure out what we can work with now. Avoid making too many changes, but still fix it. I don't want to start it from scratch. I just want to orient it better. Let's see, trying to think. Oh, yes, the other thing I've been reading lately, which is definitely not stuff that I normally talk about on stream, is history books. Or at least historical books. Actually, a combination of the two. I've finally gotten back into, and this is so dumb, but like, I've realized that I'm the kind of person who, like, if I bring my phone to the bathroom, I'm going to get distracted, usually reading manga or comics or, like, memes or junk for way too long. And it burns through my time. So back in college, I tried the idea of, like, okay, we will ban all electronics. Just you can't even bring them in the room. Just, like, leave it outside. And so it got me back into, like, other things, like paper entertainment, like books. And I realized that because normally, somewhere in college, I reached that point where I'm like, I have too much assigned reading. I'm not going to be doing fun reading. Are you crazy? And like, so I stopped reading. I used to be a super avid reader. I loved it. Was pretty quick at it. Quite enjoyed it. And then I got too busy, and it was never the most. It was never relaxing enough to be to be tempting when I was tired, and it was never entertaining enough to be tempting when I was awake. But when I kicked the electronics out and was able to break that addiction in at least a small area, I realized I could actually still read pretty well and still save time because I was less distracting. And like, so the old stereotype of like reading a newspaper in the restroom, I've instead taken on like Frankenstein. I finally read Frankenstein, like the first, considered by many to be the first ever like proper science fiction story. A lot of genre-defining elements going on in there, and it was a wonderful read, even like just a few paragraphs at a time. And I got through it quicker than I expected. Then I attempted the Silmarillion for the third time in my life and failed for the third time in my life. That book is absurdly dense. Um, I want to read it so bad, but it like hurts. Someday though, maybe we'll see. Still on my shelf. I will get to it. But lately I've realized, and I drifted out of it for a while in the pandemic because there were bigger stressors, and so I was just like, okay, sure, we need like the escapism, whatever. But we got back into things. Now that there's routines again, I've gotten back into actually reading and not like memeing, and that's been wonderful. Like, because I had a friend who gifted me a book that was a series of essays on modern German music, but what it ended up being specifically was like modern German culture of like the last 300 to 400 years. So not just like the last 30. And like its influence, like how music is influenced and like perception of music, because Germany's heavily associated with like classical music. If you think of classical composers, that list is very heavily German speaking at the very least. And it's been quite enjoyable read on that. Fascinating sort of walk through the different eras and using it to define a national idea, a national identity, even back when it was like the very, very fragmented remnants of the Holy Roman Empire, and the period beyond it that was just complete fragmentation and political infighting. But something to unify culturally over was music. And then onwards, how it was used, how it was treated, evolution, use in propaganda, different major musical locations and organizations, and their decisions and like situations throughout time. It was fascinating, even into like like the 50s, 60s, 70s, and like pop and like Cold War stuff going on. Oh, it was fun. And then I went and found a bunch of music from the Pooties on Spotify. They're pretty fun. Wir wollen die Eisbär sehen. Really catchy. Quite enjoyed that one. For context, that was one of the premier East German rock bands. They stopped touring back in 2016, unfortunately, which is a shame. Because they'd be a fun one to see in concert. But yeah, no. Anyway, and now I've gotten on to actually. I finished 2 books recently. What was the other one? Oh, like a short, like a brief history of Japan. I was trying to be like a comprehensive one, which was interesting. And then the U.S. Constitution, because I figured I needed to brush up on that at some point. People talk about it a lot, but no one seems to know what's actually in it, and we argue constantly, and everyone uses an excuse to justify things. Rather than getting caught up in that mess, I figured, why don't I actually read the darn thing and see what it says? It was interesting, and not a terribly difficult read, fairly short, even including like all the amendments. Ay, ay, ay. Because I know we figured this out silhouette first and perspective first, and we never really worked out the proportions from that, and it's resulted in some weirdness. But I need to figure out what will work and will still look not just like an absurdly stupid pose. Results are mixed. Straight down doesn't work. Oh, it looks kind of janky. That feels more poised, but then you just like straight up don't see that arm. Naruto run. What? That's very poised and going back to some earlier poses. It also looks like they're stabbing your foot or something. Like Miquella's not really looking at you. And the weapon isn't really aimed. And in any case, the hyper perspective on this sort of is prohibitive towards that. Yeah. Hmm. As much as being energetic has been, I've gotten on a little bit of a doldrum with some of these topics, um, mainly griping entirely too long about. What is the emotion? You're supposed to get it after watching a miserable, sad story, and it's like the positive that you get from it. I want to say it starts with a C. What the heck is it? Not commiseration. I'm. Give me a second. We're gonna pause. I'm gonna not pause the stream, but I'm just trying to look this up and figure out what the heck the word is. Word for positive feeling after sad story. Not ambivalence. Not bittersweet. Ah, it's like a stinking AP English word too. Hmm. I keep looking it up. But the point was, right, yes, we were talking about stuff I've been reading. In addition to the Constitution, the one I'm reading now has been quite fun because I'm reading the Diary of Lady Murasaki, which is I want to say Heian era Japanese account. So far I'm a little ways into it. It's not horribly long, but so far I'm in the part that is still an account of the birth of a prince. Um, but it's wonderfully written because it's simultaneously this very technical description of events going on. Not necessarily technical, but cold and very just precise descriptions. Not even precise, but just removed. They're just this happened and this person was wearing this and went through this action and did this and that. But it's interspersed with these moments of her just her feelings, comments from other people that are so endearingly real, which makes sense because it's a real account. But it's been wonderful. Oh, talking about one person who went through the whole ceremony, and if you were just reading the initial description, it just sounds like one of those. You see the grand ceremonies of the past where everyone's in perfect form and all aligned, and it's very precise and clean and orderly, and everyone plays their role exactly right, and then it is done, and you're just like, wow, we can't do stuff like that today. The gravitas. But then she'll interject talking about how one of the people from the ceremony afterwards was embarrassed at how formal it was and was still a little overwhelmed by it. And you're like, oh, okay, that's exactly how people react today still. It's very much the same. Everyone's still aware of the underneath the pomp and circumstance, even if you can still appreciate the pomp and circumstance. Or talking about people very simple little faux pas about fashion or comments, or one of the ones I got to today was they were still celebrating the birth, but it was day 12 or something. It's been going on a while. And one of the older ladies was waxing nostalgic about how much the imperial family used to visit their house so much more during the era of the Dowager Queen, and everyone else was just and you could tell that she was very very feeling emotional about it, and everyone else felt like this was not the moment for that conversation. And so they were all just basically trying not to make eye contact and not responding to her because they didn't want to let the conversation continue in that direction. And then someone else sort of not clunkily but manages to divert the topic. And obviously this is implications can change and translations can change things. So who knows if that's entirely the original intent of the writing, but she does capture so many of those little human moments between the ceremonies, and it's been really just a wonderful read. But it's also, I've got to appreciate the author. Sorry, I'm not drawing right now because I'm still trying to look up the name for that word. English AP feel good after sad story. What's the word? literary terms. I don't know. Literary terms starting with C. Actually, stinking spark notes. Maybe you've got the answer for me. No, don't start with alliteration. Go to C, please. But like at the going back to the comment, man, I've been a little jumpy, but we're sort of following the same threads, even if I'm jumping between them maybe a little too much. Not commiseration. What the heck is it? But yes, on the story, I've got to appreciate the author because they've added so many footnotes for context for the rituals and traditions and like references to a dance or like a name or some such that are just, you know, a contemporary person, most contemporary English speakers today are not going to be able to catch any of that. Most people today wouldn't catch a lot of the references. And it reminds me so much of like when I was studying medieval literature in various different regions too, not just in Europe, but we didn't get as far as like Japan and China when I was doing that. So even more reason I'm enjoying all this is this would be early medieval equivalent anyway. But like reading things like Le Morte d'Arthur and Canterbury Tales and stories like that, and the number of footnotes they have to have for context to explain what it is, like these things that for those days would just be completely common knowledge, basically pop culture. Just pop culture references. Their pop culture was rooted a lot more in Greek mythology and like biblical stories and such, but it was still like a pop culture of sorts. And so they not even of sorts, just full on. And so like they make all these references that either some of them you're just like, I have no idea what that name is, moving on, or like you don't even catch that, like, oh, they used a phrase that's like a quote from that poem or such and such, so it's sort of alluding to it or hinting at it. And like it makes you think about current things because like some of these are so referenced into like Dante's Inferno being an excellent example of being just absolutely drowned in references. Wonderful story, but you need context for it. I mean, you can enjoy it without context, but you'll enjoy it a heck of a lot more with it. At least I will, or I did. But because it has so many references that it's almost unintelligible. It's like almost the equivalent, not necessarily a narrative quality, but in terms of pop culture drowning, of like if we go 300 years in the future and all of our normal pop culture references, like most of the music from this era is either forgotten or just remembered by a few history nerds, or like the language has drifted, that a lot of the stuff that is clear to us would be vague, and like they don't really remember Star Wars or anything like that. And then the one thing that survives in perfect condition is Ready Player One. They might be able to read the story and follow along like this adventure, but they're going to miss like 7/8 of what's actually happening in that book, and the references and the potentially nostalgia or possibly less obsessive about the past sentimentality, but that one seems to lean into nostalgia full on a little more. And again, I'm not discussing the quality of the writing or whatever, but just the sheer like the reference density and the references. Like you need to understand the references to understand the structure of that story to some extent. Like you need to understand what an arcade is, even, which that's already one that's fading. Although some of those are coming back in new forms, and some places still have the old ones. But like it'd be like trying to parse that when you only have just a few of the pop culture references, and you're like every page you'd run into something that's vague. Shakespeare is stinking full of this, and it's part of the reason why he's difficult to read a lot early on, because when you don't have the pop culture references from the era, it sounds like it's a bunch of nonsense. Like, don't get me wrong, you can still get the narrative and story and like a lot of the writing quality in those plays, but you're going to miss out on a whole lot of subtext. And so, like, I don't know, it's just fun to think about that stuff. And it's fun to read stuff from so long ago that you're having to get that. Another one that I quite enjoyed, although I haven't finished yet, is the Alexiad, written by a Byzantine princess about her father's reign. And for the record, she's an excellent writer. It's named after its partial inspiration of the Iliad, but it's more of a recounting of contemporary real events during a politically interesting time, to say the least. And it's just lovely. But the references they make are things that, like, even just place names are foreign to where I'm at, but, like, even if you know those things of the time, politics of the time, movers and shakers in different parts of the world, like medical ideas of like honor and lineage and all of those things that they just take for granted that you understand, because they're not even like intentionally taking it for granted. It's a given. It's something that they don't even consciously assume everyone knows. It's just everyone at the time knew. It was true. So, like, I don't know. That stuff is fascinating to me. Meanwhile, I'm still trying to figure out what the heck this word is. What is this word? Not consolation, not comfort, not commiserate, not condolence. Okay. I am... No, don't take the word a day quiz. I'm streaming. I can't get distracted on syncing thesaurus.com. I mean, I can, but I shouldn't. Thesaurus stream. But what is it? That feeling of relief after a play, or the emotional release after a play. Catharsis. Oh my word. Catharsis. That was the stinking word. Let's see. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting websites trying to answer what catharsis is. The dictionaries are... Okay. Catharsis definition. Let's check this now that I've got the word. Okay, the process of releasing and then getting relief from strong or repressed emotions. And, like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of stories that are designed to cause catharsis by bringing those emotions to a head don't do it for me. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's why dystopian can be interesting for warning of the future, but dystopian for the sake of catharsis usually is just a misery fest for me. Like, it don't do it. I don't get catharsis from It's a Wonderful Life or anything like that. I get catharsis from cleaning. That may be boring, but I do. I used to get it from some of the art I did when it was more hands-on, not so much from sewing. To an extent from sewing. But that was more because the sewing was like my coping mechanism for horrible, horrible college burnout. And now that I've got so many other things that I actually enjoy doing now, like sewing has actually unfortunately taken something of a backseat. Because it's high effort, and there's other ways I can enjoy other things again. But I always like sewing, even so. Okay, let's see. I think figured out what the pose was and the reason why it's kind of not working. Because what the heck is happening with this pose? And attempting a pose refinement, like again, I can't really inflict a new pose on it. So help me, this Miquella piece is my bane. Oh boy. So much to think through on this one. Well, I may actually pause here because I feel like as much as this has been very fun and perhaps I feel like catharsis isn't the right description for today. Today's been kind of a drag, and this has been a lovely little uptick and energizing. But if I want future days to also go well, another thing I should do is get actual sleep and not just like mental relief and emotional sleep. So I may call it for tonight because I feel like I'm running in circles at this point. Here's my challenge with this one. The thing that's working really well and that we're making strides on are the details. Figuring out arm proportions, figuring out how to draw legs, figuring out that hand from last time. The problem is the underlying structure is just kind of bad, and so it feels like I have to keep redoing those details, and that's been part of... We've sort of ended up in two separate doom spirals over the course of this project. The first one was desperately attempting to get an interesting pose that told a lot of narrative stuff with composition, but at a point where I was too rusty with proportions and using models that, for me at least, did not work so well, which ultimately ended up in very clunky poses and like stuff that didn't proportionally make sense. However, we eventually brute forced our way past that and kept going, and we got to, again, some fairly respectable stuff, minus these silly legs. Like, that looks, at first glance, coherent, minus the legs. But the more I look at it, the more I'm like, it's kind of not, though. Although it's got a better... Actually, the chest proportions on this one are better than the ones we've got on the ink. No, they're not. They're like the same. Wonder why they feel so much better. But the point is, like, this still has, like, notable problems. Like, we've got our... okay, hold on. I've got too much Amogus in my head. It's hard for me to turn it off. We've got kind of our chest torso piece happening here, but it's like really wide because of the perspective and like not necessarily working right. We've got hips that I guess are supposed to be like this. Was like the original intent. I guess that needs to like, and like I don't know what's happening with this arm. That's not how those bend. Even with like foreshortening in perspective, I get that it's supposed to be foreshortening, but the wrist motion is bad. Foreshortening that just did that would be better. And this even so, this should be okay. So like some of the original proportions of the sketch aren't complete garbage, but the angles they're at are still not great. And then the leg positioning here is unclear, to say the least. Is it just that? Is it just a very confident stand? Then I don't know, a face like this. Because if that's the pose we're going for, it could work, but this is the kind of pose you would have where this is like not the focal arm. This would be the focal point arm in this pose. This would be like just holding a cane or something that they're leaning on. So if we want this to be the focal point, then A, Miquella himself ought to be actually looking at it. And the body language ought to be oriented more towards that. And B, this hand ought to not be like in the middle of the negative space, like super focal, distracting-ish. So, with that, I'm not entirely sure the best way to proceed, but I feel like I've at least had a much better time last time identifying some of the detail problems and making good strides on what to do for those, and this time identifying some of the underlying problems and at least having a sense of what we ought to do for that. I also, truth be told, there's a few things I'd like to do. Part of this is that this piece has gotten so in my head that, like, I psych myself out when I approach it. And what I really ought to do is maybe, well, okay, I hesitate to suggest it, but given, think about how many art fight pieces we did in, like, 1 week that were still quality art fight pieces. Like, look at this one. We did not spend a massive amount of time on this, but the proportions are good, the pose is good, the face I've been studying I can do better. I think the boots are obviously a little wonky, but, like, overall, that's a coherent piece with good proportions and good underlying structure. If we wanted to do a more detailed, more realistic version of that, it wouldn't be unthinkable. I would know where to start. I feel like with this Miquella one, it might be better to follow all of the techniques we've learned to do a better job of it, and actually get some pose references, and not just keep trying to wing this absurd pose. Don't get me wrong, I love the foreshortening. I kind of want to lean into that, actually. But we can do better on the pose. And I've also learned like file sizes and a few other things, like techniques to make this happen better and more easily. So yeah, just a lot of options, really, to do this better. So with that having been said, As much as I've said I'm holding off on it and I want to finish this, it feels like the route that's going to be faster is actually a fresh start, like a fresh start, not like the pseudo fresh start from last time, like a fresh start. I'll keep a couple of the concepts, but like we're moving on. Different composition again, different. Yeah, like we need a clean slate again. I just worry because I know we only have roughly 3 weeks, actually functionally 2 and change, to do this before Sword Timber comes, and we have another month-long gap where I most likely learn a bunch of stuff and decide that I want to restart it again. But my hope is that if I can get it far enough, because I don't have to finish it before that happens. What I do need to finish is getting it to the flat stage. Because then, once I have the line work in a good place, or at least a good enough place, we can go in with the flats, we can go in with the colors and details and shading, and it won't be as jarring. At least assuming my process doesn't change massively. As is, however, yeah. No, we need to, I think we need a fresh start. But I may do a little bit of that planning off stream because I feel like we've spent so much time on stream, and maybe it'd be beneficial to just, like, clear-mind it, have a go at it like that. We'll see. But in any case, I think we probably ought to wrap it for tonight, so I will let y'all get back to it. Y'all have a good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever it may be for you, and I will hopefully see you again tomorrow. Until then, y'all have a good one.